We're so blessed this Shabbat morning of Thanksgiving weekend to have Lishi Baker, who is a student at Columbia, come and talk to us about what it's like to be on a college campus nowadays, and particularly since October 7th, and particularly since October 8th. I just wanted to frame Lishi's talk the following way. There's a line from Isaiah, which I always thought was just a lovely line. But I now realize it's probably the toughest line in all of our sacred canon to fulfill. To fulfill this line on a college campus requires Herculean and superhuman effort. Lama'an Sion lo echasheh, for the sake of Zion, I will not be silent. Ulaman Yerushalayim lo eshkot, for the sake of Jerusalem, I will not be still. Now, last night, Ellen Fredberg and I were talking in the Gann Chapel with students from Columbia, where Lishi is in school, and NYU, and Tufts and Clark, and 4 different universities, but they all had the following narrative, which is the word Zion is a dirty word on college campuses. The word Zionism is a dirty word on college campuses. To be out in support of Israel is you're bullied. Most college students, Jewish college students, who love and support Israel are bullied into silence. You are branded, you are labeled. If you're a cool kid, if you're with it, if you're progressive, then you hate Israel. And you hate on Israel. And in that context, Leman Sion lo echasheh, for the sake of Zion, I will not be silent. How do you do it when the atmosphere is so thick and bullying in the other direction? And so, Lishi, we are so grateful to you for your leadership, and we so need it right now. Lishi Baker.
Thanks. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's great to be here. So obviously we hear a lot these days about, the college campus. And before I jump in, I just want to note that it's really important to remember that every student is experiencing his or her college campus differently. And I don't speak for all college students, probably not most. So I highly encourage you to talk to the college students that you know, ask them how they've been experiencing the last 7 weeks. Ask them how they've responded to their unique campus climates and just what they've been thinking about over the last 7 weeks. I think it's really important that we all do that. But in that spirit, when I think about my Jewish peers on Columbia's campus, I want to start by just naming a few types that come to mind. So for starters, a group that many of us are now aware of, but that I will not focus on today, is Jewish Voice for Peace. In all seriousness, I do think that it's important to try and understand what drives a young Jewish adult to advocate, the destruction of the only Jewish state in the world and celebrate the murder of his people, but it would take a lot more than a Shabbat afternoon speech to do that. So in terms of more common Jewish experiences, ones with which we can probably empathize with a bit more, the first that comes to mind is the afraid and anxious. So I have friends who constantly wonder who among their classmates were on the wrong side of the protest. I have friends who literally checked the list of professors who signed anti-Israel statements before registering for classes. The idea of being around these people makes them anxious, and they're afraid of what their Jewishness might mean when it comes time to group work or professor grading. It's actually really upsetting to see. Next, we have the ready to get out. Some people are just ready to get off of college campuses altogether. Last week, a week and a half ago, Danny Dayan, who's the chairman of Yad Vashem, came to meet with a group of us at the Columbia Hillel, and he wanted to know how the campus climate has affected us. And the first person who answered told him that she's seriously reconsidering her plans to pursue a master's degree at Columbia. She just wants to get out and go to Israel, which I applaud in some ways. And she's not the only one who's expressed the eagerness to just get out of the college environment entirely. And another type of student I've seen a lot is the newly proud and identified. One of my friends who was never really involved in Jewish life at all told me that he's been untucking his Magen David necklace, showing up to Shabbat dinner at Hillel, and even wrapping tefillin with Chabad in the middle of campus. And there are others who basically never spent any time in the Hillel building until now, yet whom I now see there regularly, whether it be hanging out, doing work, or just for the free coffee. I hate that it takes a crisis of this magnitude, but watching the ways that my Jewish peers have embraced the community has been super, super uplifting. This brings me to me, who I'd probably call a bit of an over-engager over the last 7 weeks. It's important before I jump in just to give a sentence or two of background. So I was raised in a kind of liberal, modern Orthodox community, and I attended JCDS, and then GAN, and then Hartman, and basically, in other words, I would say I've spent my entire life preparing to engage. So here I am. So on October 12th, I published an op-ed in a Columbia campus publication in which, this is my first of two, I attacked the idea of a moral equivalence between Hamas and the IDF, something I never thought that I would have to write down. A week and a half later, I published again, and this time I explored decolonization theory. And I highlighted the irony that these campus groups declare themselves champions of peace and human rights, yet they celebrate a self-admittedly violent narrative. I've also committed myself to learning. I was already planning to study Middle Eastern history before October 7th, and now more than ever, I feel very secure in that decision. I'm in 2 separate Middle East courses, Middle East-related courses this semester, including one with Professor Rashid Khalidi, who's probably the most prominent Palestinian intellectual since Edward Said. So I spend time with him in office hours, and I go to his class because I'm obsessed right now with trying to understand not just the Palestinian narrative about the conflict, but the underlying framework through which he views the entire world. The more we make progress on that front, on understanding, the less we will talk past each other in important conversations about our people's futures. I've also tried to show up publicly as much as I can. I've been wearing a kippah to class, which I hadn't been doing before. And for 2 weeks following October 7th, I actually wore this Israeli flag, a 3x5 Israeli flag, over my back like a cape around campus every single day. And I just want to say, since you've heard the horror stories, and you might have winced when I said that, that my experience wearing the flag around campus was actually totally surreal. I can't count the number of Am Yisrael chais and fist bumps that I got. People that maybe wouldn't have been comfortable, wearing the flag themselves. And one girl even came up to me with tears in her eyes as she told me that 2 of her friends died in the Nova Festival massacre and that she was just happy to see a friendly face on campus. That was moving, to say the least. And so all this has led me to something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially as more of my peers express this desire to just leave. Now is not the time for a mass exodus from college campuses. It's exactly the opposite. Now is the time for the genesis of a new era on college campuses in which college students, Jewish college students, carve out a leading role in shaping the values of these institutions. Not only do these institutions need us, and clearly they do, but in a society that values education and, yes, institutional prestige, we should demand of ourselves that we not sacrifice our influence in the academy. And of course, some of you might argue, well, in the last 2 months, these universities have totally forfeited their legitimacy as the true leaders of academia, and it's not worth our time. And I'll say that in many ways, you're right when you say that. If the institutional values and the leadership are this pathetic, then in many ways, they have forfeited some of their moral and academic legitimacy. But the truth is, they still attract high-quality students, and they still play a role, whether we like it or not, in shaping the next generation. So I cannot accept a scenario that leaves us completely outside the sphere of influence. And on a broader scale, the Jewish people in Israel need to remain engaged with the world, for the sake of, yes, spreading love and kindness, but also for the sake of our collective future. As hard as it is, we have to keep striving to talk not past one another, but to one another. Underlying that goal is a commitment to actively remaining at the table, even when some people at the table hate us. Though I would love to move to Israel someday, and I do plan to, I reject the idea that Israel and the Jewish people will be a totally isolated shtetl, out of touch with the rest of the world. Lastly, I want to talk about one more reason why now is not the time to leave these campuses: strength and resilience. Obviously, no college student should have to tolerate explicit physical or verbal abuse or threats to their safety nor should we be subject to the kinds of toxic anti-Semitism and Israel hate that we're seeing on campuses right now. It goes without saying that we should keep demanding of our institutions and our administrations to respond strongly and appropriately, and I'm so thankful for the ways that our community and many Jewish organizations have been working on this tirelessly. But with that said, next week we'll read about Yaakov wrestling with the angel, the story from which we get our name Yisrael, because Yaakov struggled with beings human and divine, and he prevailed. So if you read the story carefully, though, you see that Yaakov didn't win with the angel. He simply held on until the sun came up. So in this context, to prevail is to stick with it, to stay in it, and to wrestle until the sun comes up. That is Yisrael. My friends are literally in Gaza right now. They're putting their lives on the line for the state of Israel and for the Jewish people. American Jews better have the strength and the resilience to be on a college campus. When we only focus on those who hate us and submit to their hate, we homogenize an overly negative Jewish experience, and we ignore key aspects of what college is supposed to be: confronting adversity head-on, strengthening our Jewish identities and our communities, taking on leadership roles, engaging with competing narratives, worldviews, both in and out of the classroom, getting comfortable in the uncomfortable, and yes, sometimes even standing up to those who hate us. A college experience void of these fundamental areas of growth does not feel to me like a college experience at all. So what will it take for more of us to engage? It starts with education because, yes, knowledge is power. We have to get more kids to Jewish day schools, to camps, to summer programs, and to gap years in Israel. And it's not just about formal programs. All of us could invest more time living, learning, and just being Jewish in our houses. When it comes to being ready to engage, there's no substitute for a baseline of literacy, and if we're being totally honest with ourselves, in many ways, the American Jewish community has failed on this. Without a strong Jewish identity and a baseline of literacy, how can we reasonably expect any young Jewish adult to be ready to engage in this world of hostility, complex historical narratives, and vast ideological diversity? So to the adults who are wondering what this means for you, support us, yes, check in with us, and be there for us, because fear and anxiety are real and should be taken seriously. But do not coddle us. When it comes to the next generation, push us, engage with us intellectually, and model for us a commitment to learning and deepening knowledge, even when that means confronting really, really uncomfortable ideas. The more we enable a culture of ideological echo chambers, the less prepared we will all be to face the harsh realities of the real world. And to my peers, first and foremost, keep on doing what you're doing. I'm so inspired by the articles, the videos, the stories, and the experiences that I hear about on other campuses. Remember, when it gets difficult, we're all in this together, and if we collectively commit to staying engaged, we will grow as individuals and maybe, just maybe, begin to heal this broken world. Thank you, Shabbat Shalom, and Am Yisrael Chai.
Lishi, you're not done yet. So first of all, thank you. Your words, your example, what you say and how you say it are so powerful. I just have a few follow-up questions. You mentioned that you were in dialogue with this leading Palestinian intellectual who was a disciple of Edward Said, and that you would go to his office hours. Could you take us to those conversations, to the texture, to the moment? What have you learned about yourself? What have you learned about Israel? What have you learned about encounter with the other from those conversations?
I've learned. Okay, you want to just?
Yeah. Just
it's all good. All right, that's an interesting.
Why don't you speak right here?
Fine,
Because
sounds good. That's a good question. A lot of people ask me that one. I think my number one takeaway from my, I guess now a few hours of one-on-one conversation with him, and from also being in his lecture course, is that I think we're unfortunately so far from being able to have, productive future-oriented conversations with the other side right now, because we don't understand that their narrative and their entire framework through which they view the world rejects some of what we hold dear and some of what we hold to be givens. Like, for example, 1948 and the creation of the State of Israel. I think we talk about the peace process and the two-state solution, and we don't understand that the two-state solution, I think, for many Palestinians, rights the wrong. So, because they reject the idea that Israel could even exist. And they reject the idea of colonialism. Obviously, that's not a good characterization of Israel in many ways. But I think my takeaway is that we need to remain engaged with these people because this is what is real. This is what we're dealing with. And we need to try and internalize their narrative so that we can try and focus on certain areas of their narrative. Like, for example, historical connection to the land. It's not all Palestinians reject Jewish historical connection to the land. Let's focus on that. Let's see what we can do with that. Let's see if we can use that as a springboard to start the conversation about the future.
So one other question. So you are walking into the lion's den talking to a leading Palestinian intellectual whose very narrative is antithetical, doesn't make room for the existence of the State of Israel, and from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free means no Jews, no 48, the sin is not 67, the sin is 48, and still you have those conversations. So, kol hakavod. I'm wondering if you could just also share the answer to a mystery to me. Well, I understand why a leading Palestinian intellectual would feel that way. I get it. What I don't understand is why a kid who grows up in America would feel that way. Why would a 20-year-old at Columbia feel that the Jewish people had zero right to the land of Israel, that 1948 was a historic wrong, was a historic mistake, was a historic tragedy inflicted on the Palestinians by white colonialists, and that there should be no homeland for the Jewish people? I don't understand why American kids feel that way. Based on your conversations with Columbia 20-year-olds who feel that way, could you shed some light, please?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think that social justice warriors and my generation in many ways, especially the progressives, no offense, are obsessed with this dichotomy of oppressed and oppressor. I think a lot of us know about this. And basically for them, any sign of what they view as an oppressed-oppressor relationship means injustice. And if you then throw in the obsession with intersectionality, you have no one is free until all oppressed are free. So now you have no room for nuance at all because there's a dichotomy of oppressed versus oppressor, and you have no room for actually engaging with the unique circumstances of each relationship because, intersectionality says that it's not possible to really engage with different things differently because they're all interconnected and they're all the same.
So why don't the Jews get oppressed credit for the Holocaust, for example?
We don't get oppressed credit because they see, the truth is, this is a sad conversation that I've had with some people that actually reveals just how misguided they are. They basically see Jewish donors, Jewish alumni, a Jew in the White House, Jews who own sports teams, and they say this is proof that the Jews are no longer oppressed. And by the way, they see a Jewish sovereign state, and they see no Palestinian sovereign state, and they say this is evidence that the Jews are now the oppressor and the Palestinians are the oppressed. And I say that's totally ignorant of history. It's totally naive and ignorant of anti-Semitism now, and it doesn't make room for conversation whatsoever.
So one last question, Lishi. And this is of the many ways in which the world was upturned, for me, this is one of the hardest ones. It turns out that diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, who knew? Like on October 6th, if you had said to me, what do you think of DEI? I'm all for it. Love DEI. But it turns out DEI now equals Jew hatred and Israel hatred in practice. Not in theory, it didn't have to be that way, but as it turns out, for the reasons you've described. So what do you do? We still have a commitment to the oppressed. We Jews still have a commitment to LGBTQ+, and to people of color, and to Asian Americans, et cetera, et cetera. That remains valid, but as a practical matter, the people that we're supporting hate the State of Israel and don't believe in its existence. So what happened, just you, Lishi Baker, one dude, what do you do with DEI?
Wow. I didn't think it could get bigger than the last one. What do you do with DEI?
Valid in principle, but toxic in practice
I
to
think
the Jewish people.
I think the failure of DEI has been pretty obvious because it's DEI whoever we want. It's diversity, equity, and include the people that we decide should be included. And the Jews have clearly been left out of that category of people who we have decided should be included. And that's really sad. I think there's a difference between supporting organizations and supporting general causes. I think if you look at certain organizations that might fall under the DEI framework or the social or racial justice movement framework, those organizations and their leadership have endorsed statements or made statements or started wearing keffiyehs, and we just can't really support those organizations anymore because they've totally abandoned us. But on the other hand, I think that the idea of diversity and the idea of equity and the idea of inclusion and the idea that Jews have a commitment to the oppressed and to creating a better society doesn't mean that we have to support all of these mainstream organizations that claim to do that but don't. I think that we can commit ourselves and we can commit our Jewish organizations and we can commit our money and we can commit our time to understanding and learning about the people who we live with in society outside of the framework of huge organizations that have totally abandoned us. I think that's...
Lishi Baker, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, wow. We are